The market at the edge of the galaxy was never quiet. It was a place where stars seemed far away and mercy was even further. Under the dark metal roof, the smell of oil, dust, and fear mixed together. Voices rose and fell like waves, calling out prices, shouting insults, making deals. Ships came and went, each one carrying goods, weapons, and sometimes people. The alien mother stood in the shadow of a rusted cage. Her thin arms wrapped tightly around her small child. Her skin was pale blue, her eyes like silver moons, and her hair fell in tangled waves over her shoulders. The child clung to her, small fingers gripping the cloth of her worn dress. His little chest moved fast, breathing in short, scared bursts. The guards at the market had pushed her here earlier that day. They told her to be quiet, to wait, to do as they said. She had done all of that. She had no choice. There was no one left to help her. One guard banged on the bars, making the child jump. The auctioneer's voice cut through the noise. Next up. Strong worker, able hands. Who will start the bid? He didn't look at her as a person, only as something to sell. The crowd moved closer, eyes shining with greed. Some saw her as a tool, some as entertainment, some as worse. She whispered to her child, words in her own language. The child's small eyes searched hers, but there was no comfort in them. She told him everything would be all right, even though she didn't believe it. She had not eaten in 2 days, and her child even longer. That was why she had made the choice. The worst choice a mother could make. She had offered herself for sale. Not for comfort or money, but for food, if she was gone. Maybe someone would take pity on her son. Maybe he would live. The bidding began. Voices called out numbers, each one making her heart sink lower. A man with scarred hands grinned at her. A woman with cold, sharp eyes whispered to her partner. The guards laughed at something she could not hear. Her child began to cry, and she held him tighter. She thought she had made peace with what was coming. She was wrong. And then the crowd fell silent. A figure stepped forward. Tall, shoulders broad, his face hidden under the shadow of a hood. The sound of his boots on the metal floor was slow, steady. When he stopped in front of the cage, the air felt different. He said nothing, only looked at her for the first time in months. She felt someone was not looking through her, but at her. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Sir, do you wish to bid?" The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small metal chip. He placed it in the auctioneer's hand. The crowd gasped. It was far more than she was worth. The auctioneer grinned and shouted, "Sold." Before anyone else could speak, the guards opened the cage. Her legs felt weak, but she held her child close as they led her out. She waited for the chains, for the commands, for the cruelty, but none came. The man simply turned and began walking. She followed because she had no other choice. When they reached the edge of the docking bay, she saw his ship, small but strong, its metal surface clean. He turned to her and spoke for the first time. "Come," he said, his voice deep but not unkind. She narrowed her eyes. "What do you want from me?" He paused, then replied, "Food first. Then we talk." She didn't believe him. No one bought someone like her for kindness. But her child's stomach growled, and the smell of something warm drifted from the ship. Her steps moved forward. On their own, the guards and traders behind them faded into the noise of the market. The docking bay door closed, and with it, the life she had known ended. She didn't know if what waited ahead was better or worse. But she did know one thing. For the first time in a long time, the unknown almost felt like hope. The ship's ramp hissed as it lowered, letting out a faint cloud of steam. The alien mother hesitated at the bottom, her child's small hand wrapped tightly around her own. She had seen ships before, but never one like this. It was smaller than the heavy cargo haulers in the market. Yet it looked faster, stronger, built for survival. Its hull was a dark silver, polished but scarred in places. like it had seen more than one battle. The human walked ahead without looking back, his steps sure, his pace steady. He didn't pull her by the arm, didn't shout orders, and that alone made her uneasy. She had been owned before. Those who bought people always made sure to remind them of it. But this man? Captain Elias, as she had overheard one guard whisper, seemed to carry no interest in making her feel small. That confused her, and confusion was dangerous. Inside the ship, the air was warmer, cleaner, filled with a faint smell of metal and something else, food. The scent was enough to make her chest ache. Her child's grip on her hand tightened, his little nose twitching as he tried to follow the smell. The human led them through a short corridor lined with doors, until they reached a small room with a table fixed to the floor. On it sat a steaming bowl and a loaf of bread. The sight made her mouth water against her will. "Sit," the human said, his voice deep but calm. She didn't move right away, still waiting for the trick. When she had been captured months ago, the soldiers had given her food once. It had been drugged, but her child's eyes were locked on the bread. His lips dry, his stomach rumbling loud enough to hear. Slowly, she guided him into a seat. Keeping herself standing, the human pushed the bread toward the child, who looked at his mother for permission. She nodded once, short and stiff. The boy tore into the bread with small hands, crumbs falling onto the table. The soup's steam carried the smell of herbs and something rich, something she hadn't tasted in years. Elias set another bowl in front of her and stepped back, leaning against the wall. He didn't eat, didn't even sit, just watched quietly. She took the smallest sip, ready to spit it out if it burned her throat or numbed her tongue. It didn't. It was warm, gentle, real, and it made her eyes sting. Why? She asked suddenly, unable to stop herself. Elias tilted his head. Why what? Why feed me before telling me what you want? For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Because you're not a tool, he said simply, and I don't want anything. Not like you think. She almost laughed, a sharp, bitter sound, but swallowed it back. No one in this part of the galaxy gave without wanting something in return, especially not to her kind. When her son had eaten enough to slow down, Elias spoke again. I'm not going to chain you, but I need you to follow the rules on my ship. What rules? She asked, her voice still hard. Don't touch the control systems, don't open doors without asking, and don't run into trouble, he said. She narrowed her eyes, that's all. For now, he replied, pushing a small blanket. Toward her, it was soft, clean, smelling faintly of soap. She hated that part of her wanted to trust him, hated that his voice didn't carry the sharp edges she had learned to fear. When he left the room, her son leaned against her arm, his small belly warm from the food. She looked down at him and wondered if this was the calm before something worse. Her life had been a series of moments that started with kindness and ended in pain. Why should this be different? Hours later, Elias returned, carrying a small box. This is yours, he said. Setting it on the table, inside were two thin metal cards. Identification passes. One for her, one for her son. She stared at them like they might vanish if she blinked. These will keep you off most bounty lists and out of trouble. He explained. Her throat tightened. He didn't have to do this. She didn't know if she liked that night. She lay in a small cabin, not a cage, her son slept beside her, breathing slow and deep. The hum of the ship's engines filled the silence. She stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment since the market. The human's face was still hidden in her memory, but his voice echoed clearly, food first. Then we talk. She didn't know what the talk would bring, but a small, dangerous part of her wanted to find out. The morning came quietly. There was no sound of shouting, no chains rattling, no guards kicking the door. Only the steady hum of the ship's engines and the faint rhythm of metal under her feet. the alien mother who still had not told Elias. Her real name opened her eyes slowly. Her son was curled beside her, his small hand clutching the blanket he had been given. For a moment, she almost forgot where they were. A soft chime sounded, followed by a voice through the wall. "Mess hall, 10 minutes, Elias said. His tone more like an invitation than a command. She sat up quickly, her guard rising again. Kindness was a mask she had seen many times before, and behind it, there was always a cost. She shook her son. Awake gently, whispering in their own language, telling him to be careful. He nodded, still sleepy but eager. The memory of warm bread from the night before was enough to pull him out of bed. The corridor outside was lit by thin strips of white light. No locked doors, no armed guards. That alone was strange. They followed the faint smell of cooking until they reached the mess hall, a small space with a round table bolted to the floor, and a narrow counter along the wall. Elias stood there, sleeves rolled up, stirring something in a metal pot. It was almost laughable, the idea of a human trader, maybe even a soldier, making food for his purchase. But the smell pushed back the bitterness, if only for a moment. Sit, Elias said, nodding toward the table. Her son climbed into a seat quickly, legs swinging under the bench. She sat slower, keeping her eyes on Elias as if waiting for him to reveal his real intentions. He set down bowls in front of them, thick stew with pieces of root vegetables and meat floating in a rich broth. Steam curled upward, carrying a scent that made her chest ache. She had not seen food like this since her home was taken. Her son picked up the spoon and began eating, his small shoulders relaxing. Elias didn't touch his own bowl right away, instead leaning against the counter and watching them. She hated how his gaze wasn't cold or hungry like other men she had known. It was something else, something she didn't have a name for. After a few bites, she finally asked, "Why are you doing this?" Elias shrugged. "Because you and your boy need to eat." "That's not an answer," she said, her voice sharp. "It's the only one I have right now," he replied, and there was no anger in his tone. When the stew was gone, Elias handed her a small cloth bag. Inside were dried fruits, flatbread, and a flask of clean water. "You'll keep this with you," he said, "in case we can't stop somewhere safe for a while." Her fingers tightened around the bag. Safety was a word. That didn't mean much in her life anymore. But part of her wanted to believe him, and that was dangerous. Elias moved to the table. Finally sitting down, he rested his arms on the surface and studied her. "You haven't told me your name," he said. She looked away. "Names are dangerous." He nodded slowly, as if he understood. "Then I'll call you something else until you decide I've earned the truth." She frowned. "And what would that be?" He thought for a moment. "Lyra," he said. She almost smiled. But caught herself. It was not her name, but it didn't sound like chains either. They spent the rest of the morning in quiet. Her son explored the small mess hall, fascinated by the cupboards and the strange objects inside. Elias showed him how to open a storage locker, revealing rows of sealed food packs. The boy's laughter was soft but real, the first she had heard since before the market. It was a sound she had almost forgotten, and it hurt more than she expected. Later, Elias took them to a small viewing deck. The stars stretched endlessly outside the thick glass, glowing against the black. Her son pressed his face to the window. Whispering in awe, she stood back, keeping one hand on his shoulder. Elias leaned on the railing, his eyes on the same stars. "This ship can go almost anywhere," he said quietly. "But where do you want to go?" She didn't answer. Home was gone, and anywhere else felt like a lie. Elias didn't push her. That night, she found herself thinking about the food, the blanket, the lack of chains. It was almost enough to make her forget she was still in someone else's hands, almost, but deep inside. The question still burned. Why had a human in a galaxy full of cruelty, paid more than she was worth just to give her food and freedom she didn't believe in. She didn't know the answer yet, and until she did, she would not let her guard fall. The days passed slowly, yet they did not feel heavy like before. Lyra, the name Elias had given her, stayed cautious, but the sharp edge of her fear had begun to dull. Her son smiled more now, played with the little things Elias gave him, and even slept without clutching her arm all night. It was a strange, fragile peace, and that made her uneasy in her life. Calm had always been the space between storms. On the third day, they sat in the mess hall again. Elias was repairing a small tool while she cut pieces of bread for her son. The hum of the engines was the only sound until he spoke. "Where did you live before?" He asked without looking up. Lyra's hands paused, the knife stopping mid-cut. Her mind raced. She could lie. But lies had weight, and she had carried too many already. A moon called Sereth. She said finally. It tasted bitter on her tongue. Small, quiet, green skies. Until the war came, Elias's hands stilled for a moment, then continued working. "I've heard of Sereth," he said. "Trade routes passed near it before everything burned." Her chest tightened. "Yes," she said, voice low. "They came at night, ships blotting out the moons. We thought they wanted our minds, but they wanted us." She told him about the soldiers, how they broke down doors, how the air filled with the sound of metal and screams, how she had grabbed her child and run into the hills, only to be caught days later. Her husband had stayed behind to slow the soldiers. And she never saw him again. She didn't cry as she spoke. Her tears had run dry long ago, but her voice trembled when she said, "I kept him alive as long as I could. Then I had nothing left to give. No food, no shelter, no hope." Her son was too young to remember the worst of it. But she carried every detail in her mind, heavy and sharp. Elias didn't interrupt, didn't try to give her empty words of comfort. When she finished, he simply said, "I'm sorry," and meant it. She could hear it in his tone. It wasn't pity. She hated pity. It was something quieter, something she could not name. Still, she didn't tell him everything. She didn't tell him about the time she almost gave her child to strangers in exchange for a scrap of food, or how she had once prayed for the end to come quickly. Some truths were too heavy to hand to anyone, even someone who seemed safe later. That day, Elias let her explore more of the ship. She found a small storage room with a narrow bed and old blankets folded in a corner. It was clear someone had once lived there. A faint scent of oil and metal clung to the walls when she asked. Elias, whose room it had been, he said, "A friend," and nothing more. The way his eyes darkened told her not to press further. They were alike in that way, both carrying ghosts they weren't ready to name. That night, while her son slept, Lyra sat alone in the viewing deck. The stars seemed endless, cold, and beautiful. She remembered the green skies of Sereth, and wondered if they still shone. She doubted it. War stripped beauty from everything it touched. Her thoughts were broken by the sound of footsteps. Elias stepped into the room, standing a few paces away. "You should sleep," he said. "I can't," she replied. "Sleep brings dreams." He didn't ask what those dreams were. Instead, he stood beside her, looking out into the dark. After a moment, he said, "Oh, I fought in that war. Not on your moon, but close enough to see what they did." She turned to look at him. "Then you know what they are capable of," she said, her voice cold. "Yes," he replied, and there was something in his tone, anger, but also regret. "I left the military because I was tired of being told who to save and who to ignore." Lyra studied him. It was the most he had shared about himself since they met. She wondered if that was why he had bought her, not for labor, not for trade, but because he couldn't stand to leave another life in a cage. If that was true, it was dangerous. People who saved others often thought they owned them afterward, but Elias didn't act like he owned her. And that unsettled her even more. Before leaving the viewing deck, he said one last thing. "You're safe here, Lyra. No one will hurt you or your son while you're on my ship." She wanted to believe him. She almost did, but in her world, safety was a story told to children, and stories didn't last. The next days moved differently. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Like the hum of the ship's engines, Lyra found herself knowing the rhythm of the Aurora's wing. When the lights dimmed for night cycle, when the engine sound softened during long travel, when the air system made its deep sigh before resetting, small things she had never noticed on other ships. She even began to walk the corridors without fear of taking a wrong turn. There were no locked doors, no shouting voices, no footsteps behind her that made her tense. Elias stayed busy most of the time. He spent hours in the cockpit or in the engine room, always working, always checking systems. But when he was with her and the boy, he never seemed in a rush. He taught her son simple human games, tossing a small ball, stacking magnetic tiles, drawing on thin digital screens. Her son's laughter filled the mess hall more than once. Lyra wasn't sure how to feel about that. Happiness had always been dangerous for her. It made the fall harder when it came. One afternoon, while Elias was fixing a panel in the cockpit, Lyra stood by the doorway watching. "You're not afraid of me," he said without looking up. "I'm not sure yet," she replied, her voice flat. Elias chuckled softly. "Fair enough." He replaced a wire, tightened a bolt, then glanced at her. "You still think I bought you for some hidden reason? Don't people always have hidden reasons?" she asked. His expression changed, not with anger, but with something like sadness. "Sometimes the reason is simple," he said. "Sometimes it's just because I could." The words stuck in her mind long after she left the cockpit. Because I could. It was too simple to be safe, but also too simple to be a lie. That night, after her son was asleep, Elias knocked gently on her cabin door. "I'm cooking something better than ration packs," he said. "Come if you want." She considered saying no. But the thought of food that wasn't from a sealed metal packet was enough to pull her toward the mess hall when she arrived. The table was already set with a pot in the middle, steam rising. The smell was different from before, richer, spiced, warm in a way that reached deep inside her. They ate together this time. Elias sitting across from her, her son mumbled happily between bites, crumbs clinging to his cheeks. Elias asked him about the games they played, listened to his answers, and even laughed at the boy's clumsy jokes. Lyra watched quietly. It felt wrong to see a human treating her child like any other child. It felt even more wrong that she wanted to believe it was real. After the meal, Elias leaned back, looking at her seriously. "You're free to leave whenever you want," he said. "I'll drop you at any safe port you choose." The words made her chest tighten. Freedom wasn't something you handed to someone like it was nothing. And safe ports were rare. Most safe places had their own kind of cages. "Why would you do that?" she asked, her voice low. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because no one should feel trapped, not even here." For the first time, she had no ready answer. She wanted to tell him that safety didn't exist, that kindness always had a price, but she stayed silent. Some part of her was afraid that if she spoke, she might break something she couldn't fix. The next day, she woke to find a small box outside her door. Inside was a pair of soft shoes and a plain gray jacket, not fancy, not expensive, but new, not something pulled from a scrap bin or stolen from another. There was a note in Elias's handwriting. "They're yours, wear them if you want." She did. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel the cold of the floor under her feet. Later, while she and her son were in the viewing deck, a faint alarm chimed through the ship. Not loud, not urgent, but enough to make her tense. Elias's voice came over the calm but firm. "Stay where you are. It's nothing serious." but her instincts told her otherwise through the glass, far in the distance. A dark shape moved against the stars. It was small now, but growing. And even before she could see its markings, she felt her stomach twist. She knew that silhouette, the curve of its hull, the angle of its wings. It was a warlord's scout ship, the kind that hunted survivors like her. Her son pressed close to her side, sensing her fear. She kept her voice steady as she told him. It was nothing, but her mind was already racing. The calm days were ending, and whatever came next would decide if the fragile trust she'd started to feel for Elias would survive. The dark shape in the distance grew sharper with every passing minute. From the viewing deck, Lyra could see its black metal surface glint under the light of a faraway star. Its wings curved forward like the claws of a predator. Her breath quickened. She had seen ships like this before, once on Sereth, then again in the markets. Wherever they appeared, suffering followed. The cum crackled again. Elias's voice low but clear. Stay in the viewing deck. Do not open the door for anyone. But me, it was the first time his tone held no warmth. It was the voice of a soldier. Her son clung to her eyes wide, his small fingers digging into her arm. She forced her own voice to stay calm, whispering lies about how it was only a passing ship, but she knew better. They never passed. They hunted through the glass. A second ship appeared from behind the first, then a third. Small, fast escorts. The main vessel slowed, positioning itself in their path. Lyra's heart pounded in her ears. They were being boxed in, somewhere below. The ship's engines roared louder. Elias was moving. She could picture him in the cockpit, flipping switches, reading data, deciding what to do. Minutes later, the deck door hissed open, and there he was. No smile, no calm mask. He wore a dark vest, strapped with gear, a small weapon holstered at his side. "You're coming with me," he said. Not as a request, but an order. Lyra hesitated. Where now? He cut in, his eyes sharp. She didn't argue, he led them quickly through narrow corridors until they reached a reinforced door. Inside was a small room with no windows, its walls lined with storage crates. "This is the safest place on the ship," Elias said. "Stay here. Keep the door locked." She grabbed his arm before he could leave. "They'll want me," she said. "That's why they're here." His jaw tightened. "I know," he said. "That's why they won't get you." The door sealed shut, locking them in. Her son sat on the floor, hugging his knees. Lyra pressed her ear to the wall, hearing the faint thrum of the engines change pitch. The ship was moving fast now, evasive maneuvers. Then came the first blast. A deep, shaking boom rattled the walls, making her son cry out. She pulled him close, heart hammering. Another blast followed, then another. Through it all, she could hear Elias's voice faintly over the ship's comm system, calling out coordinates. Firing sequences, commands, minutes dragged into what felt like hours. The booms grew sharper, faster, once. The whole room jolted so hard that a crate toppled over, scattering tools across the floor. Lyra's instincts screamed at her to run, to do something, anything. But all she could do was wait. Wait and hope that Elias was the kind of man who kept his word. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the firing stopped. The silence was heavier than the noise. The door hissed open, and Elias stood there, breathing hard, sweat along his temples. "They're gone," he said simply. Her son rushed forward, wrapping his arms around Elias's leg. Elias froze for a second, then knelt, patting the boy's back gently. "They won't hurt you," he said, and this time his voice was softer. Lyra stared at him, searching his face. "How?" she asked. "How did you fight them off?" "You're one ship," Elias stood, his expression unreadable. "Let's just say they underestimated me," he said. But she saw more in his eyes, calculation, memory, maybe even guilt, she wondered. How many times he had fought before, And for whom? Later, as they sat in the mess hall. Elias checked a small handheld device. They weren't just pirates, he said quietly. They were looking for something. Or someone. Her stomach churned. It's me, she admitted. The warlords faction, they think I know where something is, but I don't. Elias's eyes met hers. Then they'll come again, he said, and next time, they might bring more ships. She wanted to tell him to leave her somewhere far away so he wouldn't be in danger, but the words stuck in her throat, because a small part of her, the part she didn't want to admit existed, didn't want to leave his ship. Didn't want to leave him that night. The Aurora's wing drifted quietly through open space, but Lyra could feel the weight of the hunt pressing in. Somewhere out there, the warlord's fleet would regroup, and when they came back, there would be no warning. The days after the attack were quieter, too quiet. Lyra could feel the silence pressing against the walls of the ship like a weight. Elias worked more than usual, running checks on the engines, scanning every shadow in space. He didn't say it, but she knew he was waiting for them to return. One night, she found him in the cockpit. Sitting in the pilot's chair with the lights dim, he wasn't watching the controls, but the stars. You're thinking about them, she said, from the doorway. He didn't turn, always. She stepped closer. You could still leave. Me at a safe port, they wouldn't follow you then. He finally looked at her, and there was no anger in his face. Only something fierce and steady. I didn't buy you to throw you away when it's hard. He said, I didn't save you just to watch you run. His words made her throat tighten. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not as property, not as a burden, but as if she mattered. Still, she couldn't understand why. What are you after, Elias? She asked, her voice low. Nothing, he said. I just don't want to see you in chains. The next day, the warning came. A sharp alarm split the air. The warlord's fleet was back. 2 large ships this time, with fighters swarming around them like insects. Lyra's son clutched her hand. Fear. Clear in his wide eyes, Elias was already in motion, moving to the weapons console. This time, they won't get close, he said, his voice like steel. The battle was fast and brutal. The Aurora's wing twisted and turned, its guns flashing bright against the dark. Elias moved like a man who had done this 1,000 times. Lyra stayed with her son in the safe room, but her heart raced with every shudder of the ship. She hated feeling useless. She hated hiding while someone else fought for her, when a blast rocked the walls and sent a storage crate crashing to the floor. She made a choice. She opened the door. Her son clung to her side as they moved through the corridor. Heading for the cockpit, Elias glanced back, his eyes sharp. You're supposed to be locked in. I'm not hiding while they come for me, she cut in. Something in her voice made him pause. He didn't argue again. The battle stretched on. One of the enemy fighters exploded in a flash of light. Another spun out of control, but the larger ship kept coming. It broadcast a message in a deep, mechanical voice. Turn over the woman and the child, and you will live. Lyra's blood ran cold. Elias cut the cum with a sharp motion. They'll have to take us over my dead body, he said, and there was no doubt in his tone. Minutes later, with a final burst of speed and a well-placed shot, the Aurora's wing broke through the enemy line. The warlord's ships fell back, their fighters scattered. Elias didn't slow until the stars ahead were empty, and the scanners showed nothing in pursuit. Silence filled the cockpit. Lyra stood beside him, her hands trembling but her chin high. You could have given me to them, she said. You could have lived without a fight. Elias turned to her, his gaze steady. I told you before, no one should be sold. He reached out, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. You're not a slave here, Lyra. You're not even a passenger. Her breath caught. Then, what am I? His lips curved just slightly. Family. The word settled over her like something warm and heavy. Her son climbed into Elias's lap without hesitation, small arms wrapping around him. Elias held the boy close, and for the first time, Lyra didn't feel the urge to pull him away. She sat beside them, the three of them watching the stars drift past. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, maybe more battles, maybe more running, but she knew one thing: she wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time since Sereth. The unknown didn't feel like danger, it felt like a beginning. The Aurora's wings sailed on through the endless dark, not as a prison, not as a cage, but as a home. And in that home, an alien mother who had once sold herself to feed her child found something she never thought she would again. Not safety, not freedom alone, but love instead of chains.